Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to see you today. Thanks for joining us for the TimeLooper Foundation's webinar. We are starting right on time, or 5 minutes late, because there are inevitably digital stragglers who stroll in, and we like to be able to start with everybody with us. So we appreciate your taking the time to join us today. A couple of housekeeping tips before we jump in. First and foremost, this webinar is being recorded. So all of the interactions, all of the comments, all of the slides are going to be recorded onto a video. This video will be posted to the TimeLooper Foundation's webinar page, which I will direct you to at the end. Additionally, the presentation materials themselves will also be loaded onto the TimeLooper Foundation's the TimeLooper webinar page. I tell you that so that way you hopefully really stay engaged in the content. Don't worry too much about taking notes. Don't worry about trying to capture a couple of key points to send on to colleagues later. All of these resources will be posted online, hopefully by the end of day today, more likely tomorrow morning. Additionally, this webinar will have a poll that I'm going to launch. And so if you can all take a couple of seconds to answer the questions from the poll in the first couple of minutes, it will help us to guide the content as we're moving through the presentation. There is a button for those of you who have been living under a rock the last 12 weeks and have never attended a Zoom webinar before. Welcome to your first one. On the bottom of your screen, you will see a control panel, which includes a button that says Q&A. Should you have any questions during this presentation, please hit the Q&A button and then type your question into that Q&A bar. We will do our best to answer all of your questions as they arise throughout the presentation, but should we run out of time, we will probably punt questions later on in the presentation towards the back half or towards the end once the presentation is complete. We only have about 40 minutes worth of material, which means that we should have plenty of time to answer your questions within the allotted hour. But should we run over the allotted hour, we will stay until all of your questions are answered. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're able to get through all of the prescribed material in the time that you all have committed to providing us. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. I should say that I'm joined today by two of my colleagues. Those two colleagues are Yeet and Nick, who are two fellow principals with me here at TimeLooper. We will also provide our contact information at the end of the presentation. So why are we here today? We are here because in this world that we're in, we have new challenges that all of our museum, historic site, public land partners are facing. And those challenges, which we could have never foreseen, are going to require dramatically new solutions. Quite simply, COVID-19 has totally transformed everybody's lives overnight. I never thought I'd spend this much time with my wife and my kids. We're all still alive. But here we are after 12 weeks of social isolation. And it's not only, at the home where our lives have been upended, cultural institutions are really struggling now with questions that they never previously before wrestled with. So, for example, institutions that had previously placed a premium on in-person engagement, whether it's through working with naturalists or living historians and really focusing on that interpersonal relationship, must now consider digital engagement because there's, in the short term, there's no other way to engage our audiences. But in the medium to long term, with reduced capacity, reticence on behalf of school groups and parents and families with kids to go into collective environments, digital is going to have to be a part of the way that we reach out to and engage with all of our partners. We need this content as institutions to be really compelling. It needs to be scalable. And then, of course, as Yogi Berra once said, the best ability is availability, right? You need to be able to be there. And so for those institutions that have no digital content, something is better than nothing. And so now all of a sudden we're getting bombarded with questions from our partners saying, how can we get something up and running virtually overnight? So today what we're going to do is highlight how to develop and deliver a compelling digital platform that's going to meet your customers' needs and their preferred engagement styles, but also your preferred engagement styles. We recognize that our institutional partners sometimes want to keep these digital experiences close to the vest and only deploy them in a facilitated engagement model. And other institutional partners want to sort of push it out to the masses and have it be entirely on demand. And for others, still, it's a hybrid approach. And so what we've done is design a technical approach that meets your institution where it is with regards to how it is that you want to deploy this content. And again, as I mentioned, it could be self-directed, which is another way of saying on demand. So for those of you who use on demand, have Netflix, it's that model of I want my content, I want it now, and I want to be able to navigate through it. And then of course there's facilitated, where really what your institutional partners are looking for is to engage with you and to have you facilitate difficult conversations, advance important scientific topics, encourage your targeted demographics to wrestle with challenging and interesting questions. The reason why your institutional partners come to you is not just because of your physical space, it's because of the interpretive journey that you facilitate. And so many of our partner institutions want to carry on in that engagement style rather than just sort of leaving it to people to figure out on their own. So with that, we're going to sort of tick through 4 main agenda items today. The first of which is going to be sort of a level setting, an overview of what these interpretive technologies are, and we'll sort of talk through them. And then Yeet's going to sort of give the whole dog and pony show on a couple of demos. And then we're going to also provide you some guidance on how to think about developing your content and platforms. And then once you've built it, thinking about how to deploy it and get your community to use it, which is just as important and sometimes a more challenging thing to undertake than developing the experiences themselves, and then actionable next steps for getting started. So moving forward, before we sort of jump into the interpretive content, I'm going to launch the poll. And if all of you can, sort of take that as we go, that would be very helpful. And then we'll sort of address all of your answers later on in the time that we have. Okay, so sorry about that. All right, here we go. All right, so what are augmented and virtual reality? These are questions that we get a lot. These are technologies that we really rely upon to create these immersive digital engagements, because oftentimes online tours, videos of your site, while interpretively valuable, leave people wanting more. There's a lack of interactivity, there's a lack of immersion. It doesn't necessarily meet the consumer where they are today with regards to their own expectations. And so at TimeLooper, we believe that augmented and virtual reality play very prominent roles in the advancement of your interpretive missions in the context of distance-based engagement. But for many of you, there might be a question about what these technologies are. And so for the sake of our time together today, I want to provide a couple of baseline definitions. So virtual reality, quite simply, is an environment other than your own. So when you launch a virtual experience, the goal of the producer of that content is to take you out of your present environment and take you someplace that is entirely different. And that immersion takes place in one of 2 formats. So if my goal is to take you out of your home and take you into my public land, into the Grand Canyon or into Redwood National Park, I can use present day photo video capture and turn that into a virtual experience and then place you inside of that environment. In this sort of example, really what we're doing is taking the user out of their home and taking them to another place that exists today. However, alternatively, if what I want to do is take you into the Jurassic era, or take you forward 200 years to show you the impacts of climate change, or have you sit next to Abraham Lincoln, in 1864 as he's, gearing up for his second election. Those kinds of moments, those kinds of visuals no longer exist. And so there is no photo or video or scan of the present environment that I could develop or create to put you inside of that environment. So in that particular instance, what I would have to do is utilize computer-generated imagery, or CGI, to develop that kind of interpretive environment to place people Augmented reality really anchors people in the present environment. So whereas with virtual reality, I'm trying to take you uh, out of your present environment and take you someplace else. With augmented reality, I am trying to change your understanding of your existing physical environment by superimposing very specific digital sort of tools or graphics on your real world environment. And the way that we do that, because people don't have computer chips inside of their contact lenses yet, is that's typically done through a tablet or a smartphone, where when you hold that device up to the environment, the camera from your device recognizes your present day environment, and then on top of that, it's going to overlay those digital interpretive elements. But it's not just about visualization, right? Everything that I've spoken about so far is about developing these visual environments. But it's not in the name of visualization alone that we go about creating these. It's important because we utilize these tools to help people better contextualize and understand key topics. Chris Milk, who's a famous VR and AR producer, has referred to these technologies as the empathy machine. Because what happens is people get so immersed inside of these experiences. They go from being a passive viewer to an active participant, that it totally changes the way that the consumer relates to and engages the content. It sort of amps up the emotional power that you all have to connect with your user and really advance your interpretive objectives. It said that people remember 10% of what they're told. I hope that you'll remember more than 10% of this today, because it's going to be very compelling. But that they also retain 20% of what they read, but they retain roughly 80% of what they experience. So if you can move from the didactic to the emotive, if you can move from from speaking at somebody towards putting them in the middle of an educational interpretive experience, then already, without having really done anything else, you're already empowering the person on the other end of this experience to take away dramatically more from their time with you or your content than they otherwise would. And this last point is very important. Obviously, it would be great if every end user in their home had an incredibly high-end a VR headset or an iPad Pro, but the reality is that most people today don't have these technologies. And you know what? That's okay. We should not utilize the lack of high-end technology distribution as a reason to not develop these experiences. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Start with what your users have now. So a smartphone, a regular iPad, even people who have a piece of cardboard and can turn their iPhone into a VR headset. Any of those digital immersive interpretive pieces of hardware is going to be far better than having them just watch a video or just watch a slideshow. So over time, as people adopt new hardwares, it will sort of raise the capability levels. So there are various approaches to creating virtual reality. And so what I want to do very briefly is touch on several of these different types of technologies, and then I'm going to actually pass it over to Yeet so that way he can showcase some of them. So the first one, and the one that you've probably seen most prevalent, is the 360-degree picture. So this is something that you'll find on Google Street View. This is something that many institutions will do with a 360 camera, where they'll go about capturing a 360-degree image of their present-day environment. Taking it a step beyond that, though, you can take that photo and make it interactive. So one of the things that's great about virtual reality is it sort of is the melding of the gaming and the technology community with the cinematic and the sort of movie-going approach. And so when you create these interactive photo environments, you can actually embed various objects, various challenges, various tasks onto that 360-degree environment. And then with that, you're moving from just showing people a picture towards having people drive the experience through interaction with these elements. Again, in a couple of seconds, I'm going to ask you to show you what that example might look like. Additionally, 360 video. I personally believe that for most use cases, 360-degree video is going to be a much better interpretive approach to 360-degree picture alone, because when I go to an institution, I benefit from somebody explaining to me my environment. So in this particular example, and this is one that you may see when Yeet shares his screen, you have an interpreter standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon talking about the canyon as it sits before you. So rather than my having to scavenge and try to interpret the environment, I'm relying on your institution's expertise at this moment and this place to sort of help describe the environment and why it matters. And then, of course, the last and probably the most immersive and the highest value in some instances is the 360-degree movie. So the best and easiest use case for this to think of is if you're a historic site and you have living historians, rather than just taking photos from inside of the buildings, using your period reenactors, donning, a period appropriate wear, they can actually speak in a first person approach in it through a time travel mechanism. Talk about what it's like, being here on the frontier, in the 1860s, what it's like, being one of the first, colonists in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Whatever it is your historic site or your institution does to sort of bring history to life with living historians, it's a really easy way to sort of take a cinematic approach and amp up the level of engagement with your user by making it a little bit more fun to consume. On the augmented reality side, augmented reality is really great for projecting three core kinds of sort of digital overlays on an environment. You can overlay a place, such as a 3D map of a landscape. You can overlay an object, any 3D object in the world. In this particular instance, you're looking at a redwood tree, but it could be absolutely anything. And what's great about 3D objects is you can create them yourself. You can go about taking lots of photos of an object and then upload them to these various platforms. And then through the art of what is called photogrammetry, these automated software programs will then take those photos and turn them into a 3D model that people then can look at and experience. And then it's not only about places and objects, but it's also about people. So you can take one of your living historians, one of your interpreters, and create holograms of people who can sit with you inside of your environment and provide these sort of interactive experiences. So all of a sudden, not only am I looking at objects in my living room, but there's a famous person, there's a historian, there's a naturalist standing there talking to me as if I've invited them into my home. And then with virtual and augmented reality, oftentimes what you'll see is you'll see independent experiences. So you'll see this 360 experience, this AR experience, but part of what gets lost in augmented and virtual reality from time to time is the cohesion, is the sense of relative space from institution to institution or location to location. And so part of what we really value is bringing it all together with what we call an interactive augmented reality map. So you could take this platform, whether it's a map that's a GIS layer, whether it's an interpretive map of your institution, or a timeline, whatever it may be, you can sort of take these different artificial environments and bring all of your different experiences into one place that the user can utilize to drive their own experience and then trigger all of those different pieces of interpretive content that I've just spoken about. So before we move on, and I know that was a lot, I'm going to now pass it off to Yeet, who will bring many of these concepts to life. And in doing so, will hopefully help you to get a better understanding of how these different interpretive technologies sort of work independently of each other, in concert with each other, and then especially in the context also of utilizing that map-based platform.
Thank you, Fini. Andrew, can you please share that last slide for a second? All right, so I'm going to demonstrate a couple of experiences from different parks that we are currently working with. And then in this image, when you look at it, it looks confusing. I'm seeing a map, I'm seeing a picture video. So I'm gonna first show very quickly this experience in the same living room, because that's my son, and I took that picture, so that you can have a good understanding of how the technology works. Then I'll dive into different experiences by launching different parks. Thank you. So now I'm joining from my computer, but I'll be sharing my screen from my iPhone or iPad. I could have directly logged in from here, but also I would like to see you as I'm presenting. So I'm going to share my mobile device's screen. Okay. So this is my screen. And then now I'm going to launch CutMy, which we used as an example in the presentation, CutMy National Park. I'm scanning my floor and adjusting the size of the map. Start exploring. There's that one region. You show it to them. Right. So as you can see, this is exact the same room, same map that my son was looking at while I took picture. So I'm walking around. This is an augmented reality object, AR, and there are pins on these. So when I walk through them and then touch them with my phone or my finger, then a picture appears. And then there's an audio. My phone is on silent right now. So this is how it works. And this is what you were looking at. And this is my son was sitting and looking at it exactly from here. So now let's go and launch a few other experiences that I can show different type of content. Okay, so now I am going to launch, this time, Grand Canyon. These experiences start with an introduction from the parks.
The immense and colorful Grand Canyon National Park is valued worldwide as one of the Earth's most powerful and inspiring scenic landscapes.
And again, I'm scanning my floor, tapping and placing Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon is a very big space. So rather than giving a highlight of the entire area, what we did is what if we focus on South Rim and an explore stratum. Now I'm walking and tapping my phone. And I have South Rim in my living room. Again, I can adjust and play with the size, make it big, small. And all of these pins are provided by Grand Canyon National Park Service. They already had digital content and then about these different parts, different sections. So what we did was we integrate that content on this 3D model. So they gave us the coordinates. We generated this map very quickly. And I can go into the details, look everywhere. And let's go to the most famous point, which is view of mirror. So this is a 360-degree content. It's a 360 video. It's not a movie. A ranger went to this point and took a 360 video.
Hi, my name is Ranger Lindsay, and I'm here at Mather Point at Grand Canyon National Park. Mather Point is named for Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, and it's one of the most popular places for visitors here at Grand Canyon. For many.
Now let's look at a different type of content, rafting. So in this river, they have a rafting video. I'm gonna tap. You can also animate the map. For example, let's look at the Bright Angel Trail. So I'm going to tap it from the distance by tapping on my screen this time rather than my phone.
Bright Angel Trail is the park's most popular rim-to-river route, offering spectacular views into the canyon.
As you can see, this is a way of integrating your digital content, whether it's VR or regular 2D picture, image, video, audio files, and on a context. And then that context, that platform, in this instance, it's the landscape. So now let's look at another example. Redwood. In this case, we used the 3D model of the tree of a redwood canopy. And again, there's an introduction. I'm skipping that part. Scanning. And now I have a redwood canopy in my living room. I can scale this tree as big as an original tree. If I go out backyard and see how big it is in real life. And then they provide us 360 content. Now at 60 meters up, they recorded this video. I'm walking through it.
We're at about 60 meters up this redwood now, and you can just see all of these reiterated trunks coming off of these limbs. And look at the bottom surface of this limb. This limb is probably 1.5 meters diameter, but look at it. It's probably close to 1,000 years old.
So now, and this was a 3D model. Now let me show you a different use of 3D models from Petra.
Welcome to Petra in southern Jordan. Petra is not
Scanning my floor, tapping, and here we have Petra. So this is Petra. Petra is full of heritage sites, and then what we will do is you can go and then explore each one of them. For example, let's go and look at the church complex.
This complex comprises the Petra Church, Blue Chapel, and Ridge Church.
So I'm going to silence my phone and rotate it, make it really big. And now I'm walking inside and exploring the environment. And what Petra is going to do is these tours, as I am giving you this tour, Petra Commission, they will give these private tours to the students in Jordan and around the country. So they will tour the 3D models, give information, answer questions, explore the environment. And then this is truly a virtual field trip. And the last, when it comes to storytelling, it doesn't have to be about 3D models. It is also about the stories. So for this one, I'm going to open 16th Street Baptist Church experience.
Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Most of you know about 16th Street Baptist Church because of the bombing that happened on September the 15th, 1960.
In this case, and in the city, you will be following the in a timeline and activating the content in an order. And you're gonna see this is simply they provided the pictures, but the story narration is the key here, which you are expert of. And then all we do is we integrate your storytelling to this platform. Let's go this one.
Because of 16th Street's prominent role in the Children's Crusade, the church became a target for white supremacists. On Sunday, September 15, 1963, at 10:22 in the morning, the local Ku Klux Klan chapter.
And then the last example that I am going to share is, from Breckenridge. The reason why I'm going to show you is this is a platform, and then over time you can add more interpretive content, movies, CGI content in VR custom for this platform. So for Breckenridge, their focus is 1888 gold rush. That's the story that they want to tell. My phone is on silent. I'm skipping the intro, scanning the area, launching map of Breckenridge. And again, as always, in their map, they have point of interest. And when you go and click, it is talking about the gold rush time, gold rush town period, turn on.
Of all the mines in French Gulch east of Breckenridge, early prospectors discovered the Wellington in their
now
search
there's
for
one
gold.
content here that was created to tell the story of gold rush period, visualize the gold rush, and that is from this part of the town. Now when I tap my phone here,
hello, I'm Edwin Carter. Welcome to Main Street, Breckenridge in 1888. Mining brought me here, just like it did with others who call our town home. Breckenridge has changed quite a bit since its founding in 1859, when hundreds of prospectors swarmed over mountain passes seeking their fortunes.
Back to you, Andrew. You are on mute, Andrew.
Thank you. So we just saw, thanks to Yeet, a whole host of different augmented and virtual reality experiences, as well as a range of different platforms. But then the question becomes, how can VR and AR help, and how should you think about it? So context and meaning are very different for various museum environments. And the way to start is to think about the programming that you deliver on site and what programming that you deliver on site is most relevant to your community, and then how that content can be scaled into a virtual environment. So for example, if you're a public land, if you're the Grand Canyon, it's true that most people come, maybe not most, to get some physical exercise. You're not going to be able to port that into a virtual environment, but you can allow people to explore the park, meet endangered species, visualize the park at different times of year. If you're a historic site, people typically want to come to your institution to feel the grandeur of that space and better connect with history, the stories, the meaning of your institution, and potentially engage with artifacts that make it historically relevant. And so thinking about how to port those kinds of experiences, challenges, and questions that you think about delivering on site into these virtual environments. And then of course, if you're a zoo, these tools allow your users to achieve a level of intimacy with animals that they would never be able to on site. I can't tell you how often I go to a zoo and the animals are asleep or are off somewhere else. And so, in that kind of environment, you're really able to not only, advance ecological conservation messages that sometimes get lost when people are running around the zoo, but also to achieve greater intimacy with the animals themselves. But no matter what it is that you're thinking about doing, we would just encourage you to start. Oftentimes our institutional partners get stuck on thinking of how they want to translate their entire museum infrastructure into a digital experience. And we suggest that you just start with something discrete, something small, so that way users in your environment can actually experience what it is that you have to offer inside of your institution. Sorry. I don't know why. Look at that. Why is this happening? Look at this. Okay, there we go. All right. So then with that, how should you then actually think about facilitating that kind of engagement? Oh, look, there's a question here, actually. The question is, all right, what is a good way to create for a historical museum when you only have the information and not the figure to go with it? So that's a great question. This is something that we deal with oftentimes with historical museums, historical museums and historic sites, not just historical museums. And what it is that we do, what it is that we tell our institutional partners is that at the end of the day, especially if you're a historical museum, people are coming to your institution not necessarily because they want to experience the four walls of your space. Now, I don't say that pejoratively. It's just a reality. People come to a museum to understand the story, to understand the history, to wrestle with the topics that you want to sort of facilitate engagement on. In that regard, what we encourage you to do is actually break down the four walls of your institution and sort of liberate yourselves from the physical shackles or confines that provides. For example, we're working with a museum in Omaha, Nebraska, where they have an exhibition all about Native American artifacts and Native American heritage. And they said, we want to take 360-degree photos from inside of our museum and then have people see what the museum is like. And then we said, why don't we instead take people out of the museum? Why don't we actually take people, to those actual sites, those Native American sites where the artifacts were found, and take 360-degree photos and have the archaeologists talk about what happened, in the landscape. And with that, then we can create augmented reality models of the artifacts that were found and embed them in those environments, and then tell the story of why those artifacts are meaningful in relation to the space and that particular Native American community's heritage. So that's just one example. Or if you're the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, rather than taking people through the institute itself in Birmingham, what we do is actually create interpretive content on the streets of Birmingham. Go take people to the intersections where the unfortunate interactions happened, between the nonviolent student protests, and the police. And then in those 360-degree environments, overlay historic primary source images and voiceover of oral histories. So there's no shortage of creative ways to take people out of your institution. We're happy to talk with you about how to do that. But the first step is to think about what the stories are that you tell as an institution, and then take people out of the institution into the location where those specific incidents happen. There's another question here. Let's see, what's the question here? Next question. It's an underground railroad museum that tells the story of runaway slavery. Okay, great. Nick, you're with us. Do you want to talk about the approach that you're taking on the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad on the eastern shore of Maryland to give this particular institution a little bit of insight and how they might want to think about telling the story of the Underground Railroad?
Hey, Andrew, I'd love to. So the approach that we are taking for the Underground Railroad and the story of Harriet Tubman in Dorchester County is slightly different, but talking about that might highlight an approach for you to utilize. On the Underground Railroad, they have a terrific audio tour that covers about 126 miles of what is branded as the Harriet Tubman Byway. We started with the audio guide, and we're building out augmented reality experiences that allow people along the byway to actually see and interact with heroes and heroines along the byway. So taking that concept and then porting it into the Xplore, the augmented reality map examples that we were looking at earlier, that you shared, you could create an experience where in front of you is laid out an interpretive map that shows the trails that people would have taken along the Underground Railroad. And then when you step into these different points, Harriet Tubman could come alive and appear next to you and tell you about what it was like or how she brought the information necessary to escape to different parts of Dorchester County and that community. Or maybe you're talking to someone who's preparing to escape, right? And you're hearing about the fear and the trepidation that they're going through as they're on the precipice of making this incredibly courageous move to flee north. But there, all of the augmented reality characters that are coming to life and talking to you, we create in a similar way to movie production today. We shoot actors in green rooms, we script out those narratives, and then we use post-production work to transform those real-life humans into augmented reality models that come alive and are delivered to you. But in terms of the platform that we can utilize, instead of the model of the Grand Canyon that you saw in front of you, again, it could be a historic map of Dorchester County with overlaid trails and interactive points along the way.
Thanks, Nick. And if you don't have, access to resources or living historians to sort of help you step inside of history with Harriet Tubman on that interpretive trail, there could be a interactive node where the stampede of slaves was, for example. And then instead of pulling up a hologram, you could pull up the newspaper article that spoke about that particular event, and then add a voiceover either from an interpreter or from the diary or an oral history that was transcribed, back when at the time of the event, and utilize that as the voiceover for the experience. So moving along. And the big takeaway here also is not just how to think about the content, but to start from a position of strength. So in these particular times, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. This is an example of the Henry Ford in Michigan, where they have a scavenger hunt that they ask young students to undertake when they are in the institution. So what we did is we're building an interactive scavenger hunt inside of the virtual environment with 360-degree photos. Why? Not because it's necessarily what the Henry Ford's highest priority was, but simply because they had the content, it was ready to go, it was a great place to start, and they could iterate on it later. So moving forward into how to develop your Xplore platform, the first thing to do is to sort of think about what that foundational layer is. So for many of the experiences you saw, it was GIS data that provided sort of a topographical map. For the Redwood tree, you saw a 3D model. For historic Bethel Baptist Church and Reverend Shuttlesworth, it's going to be more of a conventional display that when you when you scan the environment, information panels pop up and photos of the Reverend between 1955 and 1963 will appear before you and you'll interact with them almost as if you're inside of a museum. Your 3D environment is entirely customizable. Oftentimes it takes a bit of conversation between the institution and TimeLooper, or understanding your interpretive goals to help sort of figure out what that layer may be. But there's literally no shortage of possibilities there. And of course, as you saw with Yeet, these platforms can be scaled to any size. So whether it's a park, a battlefield, a historic site, a zoo, you could put it on top of your kitchen table, or you could walk through it in your backyard, which means that this literally can replicate the experience of a field trip by having people walk through your physical space. And then in terms of actually deploying content on top of these virtual platforms, because speed is partially the name of the game, you should probably think about what it is that you can do in terms of what's easy to access and what's easy to build. So for example, in terms of easy to access for the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians in Natchez, Mississippi, they had interpretive panels that they wanted to modify and deploy inside of their 360 environment. But then with that, they also wanted to tell the story of what the French settlers saw in the 18th century when they settled in the Mississippi River Delta area. And so in that regard, the interpretive panels are easy to access, the primary sources are easy to source, and then they're overlaying both of those different perspectives and narratives inside of that virtual environment with voiceover. Additionally, easy to build, whether it's a first-person living historian or a third-person interpreter, naturalist, historian, educator, docent talking about the environment. That's very easy. You can also take an iPhone 10, a Samsung Galaxy phone if you don't have anything fancier than your smartphone, and simply capture 2D video as Yeet showed you and embed that. The point is, don't get hung up on creating really expansive, really complicated production grade assets. What you have is good enough. And by the way, also when I say easy to access, you might have a 20-minute video inside of your visitor center, your nature center, your museum. We could cut that down into 5 60-second clips and embed those various video clips inside of these augmented and virtual environments as well. So in terms of how to distribute your content and engage with your community, we often hear from our partners, all right, now that we're building this, how do we actually think about pushing it out there? And we always say that one great place to start is to start from your position of strength. So for example, if you do a lot of interaction with school groups, facilitating field trips with students, maybe when they're in school, what you would do is you would connect with the teacher would launch, a laptop connected to a screen, and then you would be able to interact with these students, just like we're doing today on Zoom, just like Yeet did, deploying these virtual products to help supplement your virtual tour. So therefore, your interpreters, your naturalists, your educators, your docents don't have to rely on the physical infrastructure of their home, your one spot in your natural park or your museum where you have the strongest Wi-Fi. You're able to now take people on an interpretive journey in a very facilitated fashion. This can easily plug into Zoom, just like he showed you, plugs into Microsoft Teams, it plugs into Google Meeting, it plugs into Skype in the classroom. Whatever platform you use, whatever platform your corollary educational institution uses, you can deploy these sort of interactive experiences and facilitate them just like he did for you today. Additionally, in these times, what we're seeing is that many students and many student groups are socially distanced and they're not coming to school at all. And yes, I hope and I pray that my daughter is going to be able to go to school on Labor Day. But if she's not, she's going to be stuck at home doing Zoom learning. And field trips must continue in some way, shape, or form. So just like I mentioned, rather than all of these students being in the classroom on one screen, all of the students can join these virtual platforms from the safety of their own home and continue these virtual field trips. So now, regardless of what the world looks like in September, you can take all of these digital products that you're creating that are highly interactive, and your ranger, your interpreter, your educator, your docent can facilitate the deployment of them inside of these environments where you're engaging, with your targeted demographics. And yes, what I'm showing here are field trips, but you can also do that for families with kids. You can also do it with elder communities. You can target and segment your demographics based upon the appropriateness of the content, based upon, simple topic areas, and ask people to go online and sign up or join Facebook Live at 3 p.m. on Saturday to participate in these virtual engagements. And then also self-directed. So sometimes on Saturday, especially when it's raining, now that it's getting warmer out, I'm always looking for things to do with my 2 daughters. It would be great to be able to engage with this content by myself, simply by going to the Apple App Store or by going to Google Play to download the app and engage with the content on my own. If you don't want to facilitate all of these engagements, people can do it by themselves. And then simply beyond offering these programs, right, as they say in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. That's really bad marketing advice. So, heavily promoting on your digital channels, like your website, your social media platforms. Also think about all the other ways in which you engage your community. So for example, if you know that typically in the month of May, which just passed, you get 5,000 students coming through your institution. Reach out to the teachers, reach out to the administrators, the principals, and say, hey, look, we have this program that we can offer a virtual field trip. Sign up here. Let's continue to facilitate this engagement even though you can't come. Reach out to your membership community. Reach out to whatever listservs that you have available. The more that you can target your messaging to these channels, the better, the more responsive they will be. Hey, you've been a member for 3 consecutive years. For anybody who has been a member for 3 years or longer, we're offering a special private tour with the head of our, private collection, this coming Sunday at 1 o'clock. Click here to sign up. Those kinds of things that you can do are very powerful in terms of facilitating engagement. So last but not least, next steps. So, we are with 6 minutes to go. We promised we'd get you through the full content hour. We're offering all of this stuff completely for free, F-R-E-E for free, for at least the next couple of months. What we will do is we will build your platform. We will work with you to embed all of that content, to launch the app, to make sure that you're up and running with your virtual conferencing, if that's something that's meaningful for you. And then you can have it for free. You can try it out. You can see if you like it. And then, at some point in the future, when COVID ends for you and your institution, however you define that, and we're being a little bit loose with that because COVID for a museum, the Tenement Museum on the Lower East Side of New York City, has very different implications than it does for the Frontier Museum in Keystone, Colorado. We're working with all of our institutional partners to ensure that they're able to use this and meet their needs. At some point in the future, the cost per month is $399 per month. If you need our support in applying for grants, we do that quite frequently. In fact, if any of you are applying for the IMLS grants next week, we're also happy to support you on that. If you don't have access to funding, we're not going to take it away if you like it and you use it. So no matter what, this product is yours. It's yours to utilize. These are challenging times. If you are interested in working, you go to the TimeLooper website to sign up, and then we can get you started and up and running in a matter of weeks. For those of you who are going to ask questions about hardware, these are the 3 cameras that we like best: the Insta360 One X, the Ricoh Theta 5, and the Garmin Verb. These are at the highest end of the consumer range of 360 cameras. They range in price from $300 to $800. Depending upon your needs, we can provide, and your environment, how you're thinking about producing your content, we can provide more targeted guidance. All of the experiences that you just saw, you can experience yourself. Go to timelooper.com/explore, and there are links to download all of these apps and play with them and have fun and get a sense for the platform and the interpretive content, etc. So with that, we have time. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or Yeet or Nick are happy to answer any questions that all of you have. All right. Well, if there are no questions, we are happy to stay on until 2 o'clock or thereafter, in case anybody comes up with a question. And, well, that's great. Somebody said they have zillions of ideas. That's great to hear. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them, or we're happy to follow up with you offline. And in the meantime, thank you all for your time today. We look forward to facilitating ongoing conversations with each of you moving forward. If you don't think the platform is the best solution for you, but you have other general questions about how to think about VR, AR, please also feel free to reach out. We're happy to help in any way that we can.